Well, good afternoon, everyone. And if the appropriate greeting isn't good afternoon, but instead good morning, then hallelujah, we're making wonderful progress through the program. On the other hand, if the appropriate greeting right now is good evening, may God have mercy on all of us. I'm Bill Sandberg, treasurer of the diocese, and I will be giving you a treasurer's report first. That will cover the last or the most recent completed year, which is 2019, as well as a report on 2020 through the month of September. And then I will be back with you after some questions and answers with a presentation of the proposed 2021 Statement of Mission, or in other terms, budget. Looking at slide number 1, you'll see an overview of the actual expenditures in 2019 compared to the 2019 SOM. The left-hand column of numbers shows the actual, and you'll see that we closed out 2019 with a tiny surplus of $6,274. We had budgeted, second column, for a deficit of just over $1,000. So fiscally, 2019 was not a tremendously eventful year. If you're interested in seeing how well the actual outcomes conformed to the expected budgeted figures, take a look at line 3, that's the topmost line of figures, and that was the Episcopal pledge income that comes from the 16% assessment on the standard normalized operating income of our parishes. We expected in the second column $2.73 million. We received in the first column $2,677,000. So we received 98% of what was expected. That doesn't mean 98% of what would have been the full giving if all parishes were able to meet the full giving. It's 98% of what was expected or budgeted. We spent, in line 6, less money from the diocesan endowment portfolio than had been allowed for in the budget. That is generally because projects that are significant in size and weren't definite in exactly when they would start were often funded in the budget and then postponed into a future year when arrangements for the project weren't yet in place. Moving down to the expenses portion, you'll note that there's some pretty wide variation in the third column, the percentage of budget, among the expense categories. Each expense category here has been aggregated into the commission that has authority over that category of spending. And you'll see that the percentage of budgeted money that was actually expended ranges from a low of less than half up to a high of 99+%. The larger items tend to come in closer to 100% of spending. That's because they often include big lump commitments, such as all the insurance premiums for the clergy throughout the diocese, or the diocesan pledge to the national church. Moving on to slide number 2, you'll see on these blue and orange bars that the actual and the budget, that is, blue is the actual, orange is the budget, tend to be fairly close. And looking at your fourth from the left, the total revenue came in a bit lower than was expected. It was expected at $3 million, it came in a bit lower, and the far right pair of bars show total expenses. Likewise, budgeted at $3 million and coming in at a bit less. And you can see by comparing the rightmost blue column with the blue column in the fourth set of figures, the total revenue and total expenses were indeed very close to each other. Moving on to slide number 3, the overview of 2019 actual expenditures compared to 2020 SOM. This is intended to give you a feel for how much the current year, 2020, resembles the prior year, 2019. And if you'll look down to the lower right, the bottom line of figures, in the right-hand side, the 2020 budget does envision a deficit of $20,580, and that's the budget on which we're working right now. We are finding that the Episcopal pledge income, which we expected to be off just a little bit, is actually running pretty well. I'll get to figures on that in a moment on a different slide. The actual for 2019 had expenses of just a shade over $2.8 million. That's in the leftmost column of numbers next to the bottom where it says total expenses. Comparing that to the 2020 budget, you'll see that we were going up $90,000. So that the current year's spending allows for a bit of increase over the prior year. You'll also be able to see on here the percentage figures on the far right to show you how much of the total expenses are accounted for by spending in each of the half dozen commission categories. Move on to slide number 4. It's another bar chart, the same format, the same idea as the last one. This time we're comparing the 2019 actual to the 2020 SOM. And again, you'll see that the pledge income on the far left and then the total revenue just 2 sections to the right of that are fairly close to one another, as are the orange and blue columns, bars on the far right that show the total expenses for each of the 2 years. So 2020 and 2019 are pretty much 2 peas in a pod. A difference that might be noted, though, more for its indication of a possible trend, will be in the second from the left, the pair of bars marked endowments. And you'll see that a very, very tiny blue line for 2019 actual and a fairly larger orange line for the 2020 budget. Remember that in 2019, we did not draw as much from the endowment as we thought. In 2020, we're expecting to be drawing from the endowment a bit larger. And you'll find as you look through all the financial documents that we're moving a bit more toward relying on spending from the endowment than had been the case in some of the years prior. That's because we are maintaining spending and increasing spending a bit, even in the face of fairly flat total revenues. And as years go on, we're drawing a bit more from the endowment each year to maintain that spending and relying a little less on the actual giving by parishes. Move on to slide 5. That's the SOM Summary report. This will give you actual figures through the first 3 quarters, in other words, the end of September. We're on a fiscal year that coincides with the annual calendar. And so in 2020, you'll see that to this point, if you look at the third column of numbers that's headed year to date, we are showing a very large surplus of $227,000. That is because we have not yet undertaken some budgeted large spending items. And if you're looking for where those differences are, compare the third and the fourth columns of numbers. That is the year-to-date column, which is the third one, and the year-to-date budget, which is the fourth column. That fourth column is simply taking 3/4 of the annual budget and saying that that would be the 9-month budget. Some of our outlays don't occur on a monthly basis. They occur perhaps once or twice a year. And so there is a certain lumpiness or unevenness as you go through the quarters of the year in how much is spent out of these items. But you'll see that Commission on the Diocese, line 99, accounts for about $250,000 less in spending year-to-date than the proportional 9-month allocation of spending, and that explains right there why we're showing a year-to-date surplus of $227,000 rather than being absolutely balanced. Some Commission on Diocese spending is for repairs and other large items that may not actually take place during the current year, but are projected to take place in the not too distant future. Turning to slide number 6, this is the one that we've begun calling the spaghetti chart when we do reviews of it at the Commission on the Diocese or DEC. And I think if you just look at it, you'll see why it's called the spaghetti chart. It tracks month by month what percentage of the budgeted pledge income from parishes has been collected to that point in time. And the reddish-brown line that stands out from all the others is a very, very favorable outcome. It stands out from all the others because we are ahead of the pace that we've set in any of the 5 previous years of collecting the budgeted annual pledge income from parishes. Parishes, in other words, have been much more timely in sending their annual pledge income on to the diocese. We appreciate that. I think that it is partly a result of better management of this by the diocesan leadership, including the DEC and the Commission on the Diocese. It's tempting to say, oh, if we're running that far ahead, then we'll surely wind up the year with more than 100% of the budget received. That's not impossible, but it's also possible that lots of parishes are sticking to their pledged annual amount, but just being more timely in paying it. For example, if you look at the bottommost row of figures, it's the percentages received month by month in 2020. And there under September, you'll see 77.77%. If you assumed equal monthly payments by each parish of its annual pledge, you'd have 75% right here in this spot. So we are a couple of percentage points ahead, almost 3 percentage points ahead of what would be proportionate for the year. I don't know whether that means we're going to wind up bringing in more than 100% of what was budgeted, or if it just means that we will have received it on a more steady, timely basis throughout the year. Either way, that's a very positive thing. And I have one more thing to mention in the Treasurer's report. Last year at convention, someone raised an excellent question, which was, in a year when we have a deficit, where do we get the money to cover the deficit? The answer is that we have resources in the form of bank deposits. They don't show up on an income statement because they're on the balance sheet. I'm not going to show you the whole balance sheet because I think that would be overkill. But I want you to know that as of September 30th, we are consistent with our usual policy. We have a cash balance in bank accounts that is equal to somewhere between 6 months and 7 months of our budgeted outlays. In other words, if no money came in at all, we'd be able to spend, if we chose, at our budgeted rate for about 6 months before we'd run out of money. That's a pretty conservative cash buffer. I'll also say that we have almost no liabilities. Our total assets are maybe 20 times our liabilities. So we're a very conservatively managed operation, and have been since long before I became treasurer. So I'm not taking credit for that. It's just a continuity of policy that avoids us running out of cash or having to take loans to meet normal operating expenses or anything like that. At this point, I will thank you for your attention to this report, and I'll be happy to do my best to answer any questions you have.